Hi, Grace Lynch here. I want to make a video, next part in the series about memory work. Talk about how I sort of developed the idea of digesting a memory. As I had said before, when I went through brain rehab and my brain could sync back up again, and I was trying to figure out how to be in the world again, I'd come in off the streets, and I was trying to get set up with care, which of course didn't exist, and the only set of tools I had to grapple with any form of life was 12-step recovery because I had been active and continuously abstinent from my, for me, recreational chemistry by this point for 24 years. And so the mental health world, I had been in endless treatment, and then the team had told me that they don't really know what it is that's going on, and their treatments weren't helping. So they told me, we're not helping you. And then I found from traditional 12-step recovery, when I was grappling with my experiences, I'd go to meetings to talk about them and get from the people in the meeting, this is an outside issue. Even my sponsor at the time said, find outside help. And of course, there was no outside help. I'd asked the professionals in my life, let's set up some kind of program or team. They couldn't find professionals who specialize in what I had. Nothing could be done, and my recovery required me to continue to find a way to cope with my life. I did not want to go back to using, so I had to do something. And so I went through the steps again. I started a new journey with the steps. I did not talk with my sponsor in detail about it, but I did say that I'd been through a major life change, brain rehab, and like a new experience with the steps. Once I could track language more properly, I wanted to sort myself out relative to the words of the steps. In part because I wanted a new experience, but in part because I realized that once I found out what the correct diagnoses were, I had not had those correct diagnoses for 2 decades of my sobriety, and yet I had worked the steps. I had processed language as best I could, but when it became clear what the situation really was, I no longer understood how the recovery that I had developed had produced my sobriety. I've been physically sober, but it clearly hadn't been through the understanding that I had, because the understanding had been based on hogwash that it began when I initially fell. So the idea that came to mind was that when I kept trying to get back to a traditional approach to understanding things, I kept trying to find a framing for my situation. I'd apply that to my life. It would quickly reach stuff that would cause the thing to collapse. It would not match up. So, in a very real sense, I came to understand that the premises that I was approaching life with reached false conclusions. In that case, logic dictates that if the conclusions are false, the premises must have been false. And so I began to evolve the idea that I had a predisposition to try to get back to normalcy as I'd known it before the brain rehab, or brain injury, and could not. And that I would habitually try to return to that way of thinking even when I genuinely wanted to do something else, which looked exactly like what had become the foundation of my recovery when I realized that years prior, that when I genuinely wanted to build a life outside of turning to recreational chemistry, I'd find myself going back to it or thinking about it, not using, but I couldn't understand, like, trying to build a life. This is like 24 years prior. I'd go along in my day, a stressor would happen, and I'd pop into my head that I should use. So it wasn't my desire to use or not that convinced me that I had a problem. It was that when I genuinely wanted to do anything else, I still went back to it. And so that's what this looked like. I tentatively called it context addiction because I was trying to look for a narrative. So that I was part of what was driving me and getting a new experience with the steps. So we went through 1, 2, 3, and we got to 4, the inventory. And I started to play with the idea that I had memories that, because I had a very primitive sense of what PTSD was, that I have these memories that would pull me back into past experiences, arguments with people that weren't even alive anymore, trying to win fights that weren't happening anymore, in a way that I was powerless to prevent. And it started to seem like the memory doesn't function properly. So I looked in the manual that I was using for the 12 steps with my sponsor. We were following Alcoholics Anonymous traditional big book, right out of the big book. I'm not here identifying any 12-step program that I'm part of. I'm just saying we use that as our text. And it asks in the inventory to find out what's bothering us. And when I'm asking myself what's bothering me inside a given problem, it occurred to me that if I really find out what's bothering me, usually I find out something to do about it or a reason to accept it. There were things in my life that I would tell myself the story of what was bothering me, but the problem was when the memory kept bothering me, I started to realize that I no longer could buy the story that I was telling myself that I'd gotten down to the root of the matter. And when I started looking at my traumas, I kept expressing my traumas in terms of the experiences that happened. If something happened, say, when I was 10 years old, when I tried to talk about what the trauma was, thinking that I'm coping with it, I would report the details of it like a video camera scanning the environment. And so when I did that in as great detail as I possibly could. And it never shifted the trauma. It kept it in a locked state. And I got to this part in the big book where it talks about we realized that the world really dominated us. And it dawned on me this weird concept that I was responding to something emotionally, psychologically, as if it was still happening. But the way I was talking to myself, trying to figure out what was driving the feelings, was in terms of something that wasn't happening anymore. It was impossible that something was no longer happening was active in the present, because it's in the past. And I realized that I had a story that I wish was true, that talking about the past, like somehow me saying the events, was what's actually causing the feelings. But when I questioned that narrative, I started to realize that the difficulty with the trauma was not the thing that happened. It was a misunderstanding of what experience is. Experience isn't something that happens to me as an unchanging being through time. What experience really is, and what trauma showed me, is that every moment of every day, every cell, every atom of my body is being transformed biologically, electrically, chemically, forever, through entropy, through sensory input. Every time a photon of light hits my eye, it changes the cell. It creates a signal that goes into the brain. Every cell it moves along changes the cell. It returns to a similar state, but an identical one. The body changes through every instant of time. And so a more thorough understanding of what experience is the body being changed by the world, and then the mind trying to cope with what happened to the body to reestablish who I am in the moment. And so what I realized was that when I'm remembering these traumas, I'm only remembering the part of from the outside that I could cope with. I'm not going into the heart of the experience. The actual experience is not what happens to the body. The actual experience is that the body is changed in the moment by the world, and the mind has to readjust and reestablish what it is relative to the changed body, reestablish identity, meaning, purpose, reality, everything. It has to reestablish its own understanding. That's experience. That's the first part of this. I'll do the second next.